I just relocated back to Brooklyn. I still have a place in LA, but I'm mostly living in Brooklyn with my fiance. I got engaged. Yeah,
Mazel tov.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's cosmically funny to be doing a press tour about a breakup record.
Well, I should be clear. It's not it wasn't. The songs weren't written. Some of the songs were, but a lot of the songs were not written in the shadow of the breakup. It was recorded so it's kind of become a breakup record on some level, like almost energetically, but it wasn't. I didn't sit down and write 12 songs in the ashes of a breakup. I just want to be clear about that.
So, I mean, it sounds like things happened really quickly then, in terms of like relationship wise.
Yeah, if you want to just talk about my relationship timeline in the last year and a half, you could do that.
We don't have to dwell on it. But, I'm curious.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the relationship ended at the end of, kind of like around Thanksgiving, and kind of, these things take a little time, but there was a kind of definitive thing. And then I was kind of in exile from my house in LA, and I was in Columbus, Ohio, kind of laying low. And then my buddy Kyle Cox, who's a great Nashville songwriter, good friend, he was like, come, you don't have anywhere to be. Like, come to Nashville. Let's record some songs. And I didn't know the scope of the project or anything, but I rented an Airbnb, and I took my dad's car, and my dog Nelson was with me, and just went to Nashville and spent a month there and made this record. And during that time is when I met my fiance. I went up to New York for this like psychedelic sound ceremony weekend, and that's where I met her. And so it's kind of like got this cool kind of death and rebirth kind of feel to it, like it started in a pretty low place and it ended in a really special place. There's a skeleton on the cover of the album who's kind of dancing, and that feels right to me. Everything
that you just described to me is romantic for different reasons, like getting in a car with your dog and driving down to Nashville to record a record. It's almost like a cliche out of like a piece of fiction. It's just so perfect.
Yeah. And it's, it sounds like I'm trying to create some lore around it, but it's literally how it happened. I was really angry and sad and stuck. And then my friend just extended this kind of lifeline, and he was like, let's make some art. Let's make some music. I find you end up with there are crossroads moments in your life, and you can either say yes or no. And I felt like it was just such a better use of my time to throw myself into making music. It was healing. It was fun. It was, it also made me feel like, were it not for this breakup, were it not for me not being able to be at my house in LA, I wouldn't have been in Nashville. I wouldn't have had the impetus to go there, maybe. So it felt like something was being orchestrated on my behalf. I mean, I don't know. We could debate, what hand was involved, if it's luck, fate, I don't know. But it was the right moment for me to be making this record, for sure.
When you say crossroads, to me, that implies that there was a choice. But in this case, was there any reason not to go to Nashville and start making music?
No, I shouldn't say. I didn't hesitate that long, other than the kind of voice in my head that always tries to stop me from doing anything good.
This is the imposter syndrome voice, maybe?
Yeah, or I had never made a full-length record without Ben Lee, and I made this, 5-song EP. I recorded a lot of songs with my buddy Ryan Dillmore back in LA, but I think that I was nervous to work with new producers, even though I knew these guys and liked these guys. I just didn't know. Every collaboration's a risk, and it just felt immediately once I got there, I was like, oh, these are the guys I want to be hanging out with. These are the guys I want to be making music with.
Yeah, that's fair. When you're working with somebody like Ben Lee, you can't stray too far from the path if he's around. He's always there, I think, to keep you in check.
Well, he was also such a steady hand and such a repository of information and experience. So I'd be like, some of the things I understood how to do intuitively, and other things I was like, what did you just say? Like, what is that? I don't know what that mic is, or I don't know. I really got this incredible, I got to do a collaboration where we were really 50-50, really equally participating in it. And I got this kind of like unbelievable songwriting apprenticeship for all these years of just being able to, and I got to play guitar like way sooner than I should have in professional contexts. I got to be up on stage with Ben, and we'd tell the sound guy, like, keep my guitar real way down, and I would just look at Ben and try to like match his strumming pattern. So I got to really do it in a way quicker than I should had any right to be, but it served me,
So there was a little bit of fear going into this then?
Oh yeah, immense fear. I mean, there's fear releasing it. I've just decided that fear is a constant companion, and
it can either hinder you or be a motivator depending on if you let
it. And I have this relationship with my fear where it's like I acknowledge it. Sometimes it pops my eyes open at 3 a.m. and wants to be heard, but I don't want it to win, and I don't want it to stop me from doing cool things in the world. I don't want it to I don't want to be paralyzed by it. So I have to, it's not an adversarial relationship. It's more of like, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. I'm going to go ahead with this anyway.
I suspect, that you've done enough. You did enough of these with Ben, and now you've got the soul record coming out that maybe you're past, I know this is an irrational thing as I'm saying it, but maybe you're past that sort of initial worry of being actor guy who's suddenly in a band or suddenly playing music, that cliche. And now, you're through the looking glass, right? I mean, you've been doing this long enough now that you're a musician.
I mean, that's great to hear. That's not to say I don't get hit with, I make a joke that like the actor to musician pipeline is a lot more treacherous than the musician to actor pipeline, which seems to have more success to it, I think.
That's right. People give you a lot of leeway when you're a musician acting.
Yeah. And some musicians have had some real success with it. There have been some great kind of musician turned actors. And I think the going the other way is tougher. I would say many actors want to be musicians, it wasn't always an ambition of mine. I think I came to it, pretty purely. And, I just consider myself a storyteller. I participated in 9-year stories. I've done 90-minute stories, and these are like 3 to 4 minute stories that I get to tell. And, the older I'm getting, I just, sometimes when I act these days in other people's stuff, which I still do a lot of, and I can find some enjoyment in it, but sometimes there's something so weird about being my age and wearing clothes that aren't mine and saying like, my name is Jeff for the day. And there's just something like the older I'm getting, I really want to be more myself and say my own words. I think that, at some point, when I was younger, I maybe didn't have a lot to say. I think I say that in one of my songs. I wish I'd started doing this in the 90s, but I'm not sure I had much to say.
But you probably thought you had a lot to say at the time.
Well, I don't know. I certainly wasn't as prolific a writer. I was more interested in like doing, a David Mamet play or something. Like I wanted to give voice to other people. And now that I'm older, I've had some failure. I've had some success. I've been kicked around. I've experienced a lot of like love and friendship and transformation. And I just feel like I actually have something to say, and I feel more confident in my voice. And, I think that I still get haunted by the, oh God, what's he doing? Like, why is he doing this? Like, there are anything you're afraid of in your middle of the night terror, someone will come out on social media and confirm that for you. So you just have to, that's the cost of doing business, in the modern world. Like, you just have to kind of like take your punches. And sometimes I think that that's kind of like, oh, we're here, we're actually doing this. Like, there's something cool about it. When you're actually doing something, people will come out and say they hate it and they hate you and you should stop. And then there are many other people that say not that actually encourage you and want you to keep moving forward. So you just got to be careful about who you listen to.
The people who are not going to encourage you are probably not the people who are showing up at shows. You know, people aren't paying the door price to boo you.
Yeah. You got to go where it's warm, you know.
You mentioned that the 9-year story. I'm assuming you're referring to the fact that you were on a television show for roughly that length of time.
Yeah.
As it drew to a close, and you were looking at what was next, did you stop acting? Did you want to stop acting for a little while and just try something completely different?
No, I mean, I haven't stopped acting in the last 9 years at all. I've done, you know, a ton of plays. I went right into a Broadway play right after I ended How I Met Your Mother for 9 months. And I've done a bunch of series that have gone, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 seasons, but nothing on the scale of How I Met Your Mother. And I was also, I think that it's okay to go away for a while. I think that there's some actors, especially, they're so afraid of a moment where they're not kind of doing something publicly, or they're so afraid. Now, I did a PBS show for 2 seasons about the Civil War called Mercy Street, and it was an unbelievably good, high-quality show. But, you know, the teenagers in Portugal who were watching How I Met Your Mother, like, weren't watching that. So they're like, where'd you go? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm in Richmond, Virginia filming this TV show. Like, all I knew was I didn't want to repeat myself again. Like, any role that came along that was like, you know, lovesick single guy in New York City looking for love, or like, I got offered some of those roles, but I was like, I have to do something that feels different, that ages me up a little bit. Because even by the end of How I Met Your Mother, I was like, I have grown faster than this guy, you know? So whereas I started out feeling maybe more aligned with him, by the end, I was like, wow, I need to do things that feel like that are more aligned with kind of where I am. And so, you know, music, right? I wrote and directed 2 films while I was doing How I Met Your Mother, and music became a way to be creative. I've always hated, you know, being an actor. They got to call you off the bench. You can't just wake up one morning and be like, I'm going to act today. You know, like, you have to get permission to do it. And I just hated the powerlessness of that. That's why I became a writer and a songwriter, because I can wake up and be creative every day. And that's really what I want to do. You
hated a certain element of it, but as you said, you never really stopped doing it, and you're still doing it. There must still be something there that you love. Yeah,
I just wanted to broaden my possibilities of how to be a creative person, you know? Like, I really love being behind the camera and at the monitors and wearing my own clothes and not being the person in the front and center. And, you know, I love playing songs for people live. Like, some days I want to be creative a little more from, you know, behind the scenes. And other days I'm like, okay, I'll be out front. But I'm not hungry to have all eyes on me all the time. Like, there are actors, and I actually admire these people in some weird way, where they're really comfortable, like, putting on the clothes and going to the award shows and doing the carpet and doing. I've never made peace with it. It always costs me something. You know, I come home and I feel like I gotta smudge myself with sage or something. Like, I just need to come back to myself. And I'm just trying to find what feels the most authentic. And some of it, again, is the cost of doing business. But I've just never been one of those people that's like, I wanted to be looked at all the time. Sometimes the richest part of my life is private. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need it, even though I try to write really authentically about what's going on. I don't need to expose my life and myself all the time. There's an element of that that's inevitable. You know, in that, again, like, we're talking about this record, and in the press material around it, it mentions the breakup aspect, which is, you know, how I'm aware of that. There is an element of when you are putting art into the world, you can't. A lot of artists would love to let the art solely speak for itself, but at the end of the day, like, people want to know these things about you, and you have to figure out what part of yourself you're willing to share with the world. Yeah, and sometimes I think an artist can have a take on what they made that is maybe less resonant and deep than what the audience got. So you can actually constrict your art by talking about it too much. I mean, I think there's a kind of thing where you can say like, well, this is what inspired this, or this is what it's going for. But when it goes out into the world and people get a hold of it, it becomes theirs. It becomes, you have to surrender your own ownership of it and let people do with it what they will, And I'm okay with that, I know what these songs mean to me, but they also change, they change as I change. I remember talking to Rachel Yamagata, who's a friend, about like, what do you do with love songs that you wrote for people who you're no longer in relationships with? And she's like, they just become about something else or someone else, or they morph. They're no longer about this one person. They're about something. They become more cosmic in some way.
I completely understand what you're talking about from the love perspective, but the flip side of it is, what do you do with a breakup song? You're very literally carrying that around with you. And I'm not saying that a breakup song doesn't have the opportunity to evolve, but there will always be a piece of that person and that moment in that song.
Yeah, but I think in some ways that's like, we can't undo our past, right? Like we are the sum total of our experiences and our relationships. And, I feel like I'm in a really sweet, lovely, complicated, nice time of my life. And I think when you get to that kind of place, even a good day where you say, this was a good day, you almost have to like turn around and bless everything that led up to it. Like all the twists and turns and all the regrets and the folly and the relationships that despite your best efforts didn't work out. And I think a breakup song, it's almost like a scar on your body, right? Like it's like, this one I got here and this one I got here. You can kind of point to, the laugh lines around your eyes or whatever. Like there's something I like about having a history, like having some looking behind you and saying like, wow, I've traveled, I'm pretty high up this mountain. I've still got some to go. And I think you also have to take care of yourself in some ways. Like I read this interview with Julianne Baker, who I really admire. I think she's a great songwriter and seems like a cool person. I don't know her, but she was talking about, her first two records, they were such, kind of the nerve endings on those songs were just so exposed. And then she realized how long she'd have to be touring these songs. And she was like, do I want to be in this space every night? Like it kind of lightened up her songwriting in some ways, because it was like she had to protect herself as she took these songs on the road. I hope I'm not misunderstanding what she said, but it was something along those lines, and I get that.
It's funny to be talking about lightening up songwriting and then talking about this album that I think the way you put it is that everything is about death in one way or another on this record.
Yeah, but death in a broad context, right? Like death of a chapter in your life, the end of a relationship, an end of a version of yourself that served you up to a point and then has to be kind of retired. And then there's the fact of death and mortality, which is always looming, which I think we're in a death phobic culture. And I think it serves us to put that a little more at the front of our minds. I think this is in a lot of ways, this is a midlife album, because it's really reckoning with like where I've been and where I'm going. It's kind of like a pause to say, okay, I've had all these experiences and I've hurt some people. I've been hurt. Like I said, I've had some success. I've had some failure. And it's kind of a midlife reckoning of saying like, I don't have all the time in the world left. I think one of the best parts of youth, which I don't even, it's wasted on the young, right? Like, I don't think when you're young, you understand that you're actually mortal because it just feels like you got all the time in the world. And then you turn 40 and it's baffling. You're like, how did I turn 40? Like, I don't understand this. I was 19 2 days ago, you know? So I'm trying to reconcile that with myself, and also, you know, sing about it in such a way that it invites the listener in to, you know, maybe reflect on their own kind of curious relationship with time. I mean, time is a really mind-fucky thing, you know?
Funnily enough, I was speaking with Roger Eno earlier this week. He gives sermons and speeches at people's wakes, and it's the same. This is exactly what you're talking about, and this might, in some ways, this might be like a very profoundly American thing of just, you're right, like completely pushing death out of our lives. And when people get to a certain age, you know, like putting them in the home and taking them out of the house. But certainly, you know, he's a man in his, I think, late 60s, 70s, and certainly his relationship with mortality, I would think, would be different than, you know, somebody in their 40s.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the good news is if you're lucky enough to live into your 80s, let's say, or 90s, like, you're gonna hit all these mileposts, you know, and it doesn't mean I don't think that age confers wisdom. I think that's a fallacy. I think wisdom is something that you are open to, and you have to metabolize certain lessons. And some people don't do that, and they become control freaks, and they become really bitter and angry and shut down. But other people that I've watched age, and I really admire these people, they seem to become more open and less guarded and more curious and fascinated with the world, and less kind of combative. You know, they're more interested in service and you know, just being more compassionate because, you know, they've been dinged up themselves. So, you know, I'm coming to the end of my 40s. I'm really curious about what my 50s will look like. It's like, I'm interested in these markers that are, you know, aging. Look, it's a bummer. The body slowing down, you know, the body changing. Like, there's some bummers with it, but there should be, I think, enough wisdom and grace to offset the rigors of aging if we're doing it right.
You did a track by track breakdown, and one of the stories behind the songs really ring true to me because I had to buy a cane recently because I'm dealing with some sciatica, and you know, knowing that, like, you know, it's a herniated disc and it's sciatica, knowing that these things are going to be temporary, but then all of these things that should be very obvious to you dawning on you because you're suddenly going through this health thing in a way that you hadn't before. And it, you know, it sounds like perhaps you were dealing with something similar. You had discussed the back issues that you were going through at the time that basically birthed the song. Yeah,
that was, I think it was like right before my 46th birthday. I was 45, turning 46. And my birthday, I've always been a little weird around my birthday. I get a little squirrely. I don't know. I know a lot of people.
Very melancholy.
Yeah. The same thing happens to me. It's like, it's weirdly like my least favorite time of the year. The actual birthday ends up being okay, but the kind of lead up to it and the reflection it causes, and my back went out in a way that it had never gone out, like a real freaky kind of needed some real assistance and some shots and stuff. And when I started writing that song, it wasn't even as bad as it got. But, you know, the first line of that song is, what is it? You feel like you are 17, your back says you are 45, at least it does this morning, you know? And, I think, you know, the history of rock and roll is very, and I don't know, this isn't really a proper rock record, but it's, so much of pop music is youth focused, you know, and I just think there's something interesting about writing about limitation. You know, I'm a huge Nick Cave fan. I don't know if you get his Red Hand Files. He does this weekly email. It's the best thing you'll read every week. It's like, they're free to subscribe, but He has a book. He was interviewed by a journalist, an Irish journalist. It's called Faith, Hope, and Carnage. And he's lost now 2 children. He was a heroin addict. He's sober. He's just like, he's been to the dark side and he's emerged with some real wisdom. I think he would deny this, but I think he has some of the prophet about him. Like if you really listen to what he's saying about grief and about time and aging and creativity, he's become a real artistic hero of mine. And he is unafraid to speak about the numinous and the tragic and he's also not afraid of kind of religious imagery, evoking that. Like I just find him to be so bracing, his honesty and his humility. And, I'm trying in my own way to be the kind of artist I would admire, right? Like, can I write about things that on the surface might be maybe not the most obvious, things for us? Because that song, Joshua 45:46, which closes volume 1, is like, it's quite a hopeful song. And it's quite a, surrendered and accepting song. And I hope it's a wise song, right? But it starts from a place of pain. And I think that, And I think that, all the good, like all wisdom on some level is probably rooted in pain. And that's why it's rare for young people to be wise. That doesn't mean they can't be smart, but I think wisdom carries with it some real wounding and some real pain. And when you are able to, accept that and honor that and then turn around and share what you've learned, I think that, I don't know, that's kind of art I'm interested in.
What is your relationship with the religious or the spiritual like at this point?
I grew up Jewish, and I went to an Orthodox Jewish day school, even though my family wasn't super religious. They were active in the synagogue. But I definitely grew up with I think, like a kind of Old Testament punishing God. The God that's watching me, tallying. It's what my friend Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan priest who I think is so wise and wonderful, but he calls it the Santa Claus God, who's been naughty, who's been nice.
That's a point of, I grew up Jewish, but I grew up Reformed, but that is a point of great overlap between the Jews and the Catholics.
Yeah. I mean, whenever you drop in with a Catholic, you're like, this wasn't so different, But I think when I discovered the theater became my God, and the empty theater was my cathedral, and at some point, I think it was around the time I got How I Met Your Mother, and I got everything I thought I wanted, and I found myself in some real despair, that I started looking more deeply into if happiness was possible, if it was sustainable. I think I always believed in the numinous and the unseen. I always felt like there was some sort of unseen order, and I don't know if I call that God. I just call it something. I know that I am in dialogue with something. I know that I never quite feel alone. I feel my life has had a dimension of blessing to it, not just good fortune around, career and a roof over my head and all that, but like, the people that have been in my life, the opportunities I've had, the teachers I've had. I got really into, ayahuasca and psychedelics, and I was just looking for different ways to worship. I've been a longtime meditator. So, and then weirdly, I came back to our tradition. I came back to Judaism in some ways. My fiance's Jewish, which I was not. That was totally unexpected.
There's something in the DNA. There's something in the lizard brain that just like, it'll always be there.
Yeah. And I don't know. I don't like tribalism, and I don't like, there's certain things I find odious around tribalism, but there's other things that I if my fiance and I have kids, it's not going to be a question if the kids are going to go to college, for instance, or like there's certain things culturally that I really appreciated about the way I grew up. Yep. And, I like lighting the candles on Friday night. I like powering down the technology early and trying to have some sort of Sabbath. I think I've gone deep on a lot of different traditions, and I think there's wisdom in all of them. I'm pretty spiritually omnivorous.
It's been a few years, but I did ayahuasca actually in Brooklyn. I know a lot of people who do it the first time and then just keep going back. For me, I mean, partially because I'm a journalist and the price of it keeps going up, but also it was so emotionally heavy for me. I mean, I'm one of those people, I basically cried for about 6 hours.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I would describe that as a pleasant experience.
How'd you feel afterwards?
I made the very stupid high person mistake of I went to the bathroom and then just stared in a mirror.
Oh, yeah. Rookie mistake. Stay away from mirrors. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like one thing to do it on weed. It's another thing to do on ayahuasca, which is supposed to have like the effect of like really internalizing things. But as somebody who is like very, very prone to anxiety my entire life, like I don't want to go too much into my own brain. That's the exact reason why I actually had to stop smoking weed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I did so much of it over like a decade or 12 years, and it was really important for me to do that for some reason. And I've looked back and said, why did I keep going back? Like, why was I heading to South America all the time? Like, why was I...
Oh, you went to the source.
Yeah. I did jungle. I did the Sacred Valley in Peru. I did a couple ceremonies at Machu Picchu, like in Machu Picchu. Like, I really did some weird, interesting things. And, to be honest, I would not say that my experiences in Peru or Brazil or Colombia were notably stronger or more powerful or more wisdom dispensing than my ceremonies in Brooklyn or Hawaii or Mount Shasta. Like, I think the medicine works wherever you take it. But I've always been, I'm not physically reckless. Like, I'm not going to be jumping out of airplanes. I'm just, that's not my thing. But I have some psychic courage. Like, I'm up for experiences where I'm actually wildly curious about my mind. And that doesn't mean there's not potholes and landmines that are a little scary. But there was something about ayahuasca. My friend, my fiance's dear friend is about to do it this weekend for the first time. And I said to her, it's a benevolent plant. Like, just remember, you're not being punished ever. It's on your side.
Yeah, except for the throwing up, but beyond that.
Yeah, but I even feel like there's a mercy in that,
sure. It's purging.
What my first purge in Brazil, I remember feeling like I knew I was about to purge, and I said, okay, something's coming up. It's from my mom's side of the family, and it's generations old. Like, it goes back generations. And when I let go of it, it was so relieving. It felt like a family kind of something had unwound.
Trauma? Are you talking about like generational trauma?
I guess. I couldn't even say what it was. It didn't carry with it like a specific, I just knew it was from like this kind of matrilineal thing. And then it went back a long time. And that's part of the mystery of it. You're not going to know everything. As
you're describing it now, it sounds like to a certain extent you're maybe past that point in your life.
I haven't done it for a couple years. I work with other, medicines. I'm a little less interested in the like super dramatic, forget my first and last name kind of experience. I'm much more interested in like heart openers or even just like mushrooms with some friends, where you can just be lighthearted and insightful when necessary. But I like going deep, and I like getting introspective, and I like lightheartedness and joy. Like I want to also honor those experiences, because life is not one thing. Like it's tragic, it's hilarious, it's annoying, it's fascinating, and psychedelics are all those things to me.
And I suppose ego death is also a kind of death. as we're talking.
Yeah, and that's the scariest one, that's the hardest one. I think ego death is harder than body death. And I think that when we're facing body death, the thing that's really scaring us is that death of the ego. That's the letting go. I suspect, and this is just a suspicion, but I suspect once the ego has been let go of, the body death is not all that harrowing.
I do think that it is something that people do seek out when they're doing psychedelics, that people actually would like the feeling of letting go. But you're right, it is scary.
Yeah, and the psilocybin, Johns Hopkins, experiments with terminally ill cancer patients who are just dealing with so much anxiety about mortality, and when they have this experience, this numinous kind of ego dissolving experience, they just almost uniformly, it seems, come back and say, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay if I go away. I know that I'm bigger than this. I know I'm not really going anywhere, even though my body's going away. It's fascinating stuff.
The fact that mortality really did, in various ways, make it onto the record, is there a sense in which that's a direct outgrowth of the pandemic?
Yeah. I mean, I would say yes, even though I didn't think of it directly, but a good chunk of these songs were written in the first year or two of the pandemic. So I think that even a song like I Will Wait for You, which is a real, folky love song on Volume 1, it ends, it's really about loving someone through anxiety and depression, but it ends with some death imagery. I think that, the George Floyd protests, the pandemic, it was such a provocative time. And for the first 7 months of it, I was pretty alone. But I was really, it was quite a fertile, creative period for me. So I would say, that came into play.
When you say loving someone through anxiety, depression, do you mean their anxiety, depression, or yours?
Yeah. In this instance, it's theirs.
For reasons I mentioned earlier, I always feel like I'm on the other side of that. How do you cope with that? I especially since, speaking of being solitary, I mean, certainly the way that my depression manifests itself is me just wanting to be completely alone. And when you're in a relationship with somebody, you can feel shut out.
By their isolating?
I love this person. I want to give this person space and time. But at a certain point, it's like, well, it's hard. Are you avoiding me?
Yeah. I don't know. I've not dated a seriously depressed person, but I'd say every woman I've been in love with has run pretty anxious. You'd have to talk to my therapist about why that's the case, but I'm pretty good at dealing with anxious people. I have my own anxiety, but when I'm faced with someone's more intense anxiety, I get pretty calm. I adapt. I wouldn't say I run depressive, but I have, as you can probably guess, I have somewhat of a melancholy streak. I can get just sad about the world, or about, a friend I was doing theater with years ago, in college. She said I was like a real life Chekhov character. I have a kind of Russian melancholy about me, and I kind of, bemoan certain things or wonder what it's all about. But that's all, if you have an outlet for that, which I do, that's all pretty interesting stuff. Even though it can be hard to live with.
Having spoken with you before and having read some interviews with you, that to a certain extent that melancholy manifested itself during How I Met Your Mother, which it's such a hard thing for the brain to reconcile, because obviously you're at the height of this thing. You're doing this thing, long running popular show on network television, this thing that so many people would kill for, and wondering why you can't be happy.
I mean, it's hard when you're talking about, 9 years or a decade of your life. I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, because 10 years is 10 years, and you're going to be up, you're going to be down, I mean, some of my favorite experiences were during that time. Some of my deepest friendships were born of that time. Some of my greatest artistic, liberation, joys were during that time. And many days of that show were hilarious and lovely. But what I think what I've maybe overstated in some of these interviews is that some of it was really hard. And it was hard because you get what you thought you wanted, and it didn't solve the thing. It didn't solve the hole in your chest, right? And in fact, I felt the hole widen, because I didn't have the kind of morphine drip of sustaining hope that what if one day when I get this, I'll be happy. And I think it's true, when people my dad was a lawyer for many years, and he said there was something in their firm, they called it post-partner depression. You make partner, you work for so many years, and you get the thing, and you just have to, you have to deal with the fact that you're still you. This didn't magically take away your anxieties or your fears. Nothing really does. And I think I had to live through all that to figure out why I was doing this. Why was I an actor? What was I hoping to get? Certainly, I remember Ben said something to me that really struck me. He said, if you are in a stadium full of people who are cheering for you and screaming your name and loving you, and you don't like yourself, those cheers will be painful for you. They will be absolutely painful. So I think a lot of people write and talk about failure or about how to achieve success, but very few people talk about what it feels like when you're there. I don't know if you read Steve Martin's book, Born Standing Up, about his early...
It's been a decade, but yeah.
Yeah. But I remember that moment where he's one of the first rock star comedians. He's playing stadiums, and just the juxtaposition towards, 40,000 people screaming and laughing, and then an hour later being in the hotel room, dead silent, alone, and the acute loneliness that feels when those are juxtaposed together. I think that if you're talking to people who are really honest, it's success is thrilling, it's fun, it's scary, it's crazy making, and you'll much like a relationship, like a good relationship, you'll have to confront parts of yourself that are maybe not your favorite parts of yourself.
I think the reason why people don't talk about it is because who wants to hear a super successful person talking about how miserable they are?
Yeah, but then they OD or they, check themselves into treatment. They have to suffer quietly because we haven't created a culture or a container where people can be honest about all this stuff. I mean, I think the myth in America is so woven into the fabric of this country that when you get this, you will, we're inundated with advertisements and with the promise of a better life. If you only had this, if you only had that. And, as far as I can tell, making art, having community and food with people you love, being of service to people who are hurting and in need, those are the things that really give you some joy. The other stuff, I don't know. I remember when I was a kid, I wanted this robot, this crappy robot that served you drinks on a tray.
Was that the Radio Shack robot?
Yeah. And I was dying for this thing, and I was begging my parents, and they finally got it for me. And I remember playing with it for maybe 10 minutes and being this thing sucks. I don't care about it anymore. And it just sat in my room for years, and it was a good lesson for me, because the stuff we think we want, we metabolize it so quickly, and then we have to get more and better and newer. And it's just endless, and it's actually quite depressing. So I've just tried to align myself with things that I have found are sustainable and nourishing and matter. And none of those things are matter. Like none of those things are material. I mean, we bought an apartment in Brooklyn and I love it, but I stopped noticing it after a while, right? It's just the place we live.
The other aspect of what you're talking about is that success never looks like you think it is going to look. And there are always going to be people who are more successful. And you fall into that trap of wondering why somebody got that job or, when you didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, comparison is a real demon, So I'm grateful for the experience of whatever despair was associated with that. And again, I don't want to lay it at the foot of the show because that show changed my life in so many wonderful ways. And, so many of the people that I met were and continue to be very special to me. So I've just had to refine what matters to me, and getting to tell stories with music, like this matters to me, this record matters to me. Getting to have conversations like this, matter. I just want to connect it at pretty deep levels and hear where people are at and hopefully offer them something that they can take with them.
You rhetorically asked the question of why am I an actor? The question that you had to answer. I think we did a pretty good job discussing why you're a musician, but what keeps bringing you back to acting?
I'm really interested in people. I'm curious about people. I find still when I'm watching something and I see something really honest and funny and authentic, it still is thrilling. I like stories. I remember my dad got me that Edith Hamilton mythology book. I was really into, and even at my Hebrew day school, I loved the stories in the Torah and I love mythology. I continue to be fascinated by archetypes and I went to NYU and I studied with Zelda Fichandler, who was this, towering figure in the American theater. And she talked about, actors are doing a real service in this culture because a lot of people cannot have the emotions that we have. They need us to do it for them. They need to see us so they can have the catharsis because they're not going to be able to do it for themselves. And she imbued in us this kind of holy sense of mission or purpose. And that's never really left me, sometimes I think it's ridiculous and some projects are obviously better than others. I'm about to do a play at the Public Theater in the spring that I'm completely obsessed with and think is so scary and wonderful and worthwhile. So I'm really looking forward to that. But it's just changed, you've got to renegotiate every decade, I'd say, why you're doing what you're doing. I don't know if even just actors, but I'm sure journalists have to do that. Why you started doing it is not why you're still doing it. I'm alone. What a pity I won't be soon in New York City. When I see you, please permit me